Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Let's begin this evening with what Prime Minister Imran Khan had to say about peace in Afghanistan. Speaking at the Central and South Asia Conference in Tashkent last week, Khan referred to allegations by Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani as extremely unfair. Earlier, speaking from a prepared text, Ghani mentioned Pakistan 5 times and chose to put the blame of what's happening in Afghanistan at Pakistan's door. Khan, speaking from his prepared text, set it aside when talking about the challenge the situation in Afghanistan poses to the region, but more specifically to Pakistan, and gave reasons for why peace in Afghanistan is the most immediate and vital priority for Pakistan. What is important, however, and which we will discuss this evening, is the fact that Ghani, despite knowing Pakistan's investment in the process, continues to dissemble about it. His National Security Advisor Hamdullah Mohib, as well as his first Vice President Amrullah Saleh, continue to issue extremely provocative statements with reference to Pakistan and the international border between the two countries. It is clear that neither can do what he does without a nod from Ghani. Recently, Ghani himself mentioned the border at the inaugural ceremony of the new airport at Khost and called upon the Taliban to never accept the Durand Line, a term used by successive Afghan leaders. What exactly is Ghani and his close coterie playing at, even as they need Pakistan and even as Afghan National Defense and Security Forces fold before the Taliban onslaught? To find plausible answers to these questions, I'm joined by Dr. Rifat Hussain, Head Department of Public Policy at the National University of Science and Technology in Islamabad, Zahid Hussain, eminent journalist and author most recently of No Win War, The Paradox of US-Pakistan Relations in Afghanistan's Shadow. He also joins us from Islamabad, and Mariam Bardak, Afghan journalist, analyst and activist. Thank you to the panel. Let me begin with Mariam Bardak. Mariam, I really want to get my head around what is the play here for Ghani and his close coterie, primarily Mohib and Amrullah Saleh, but also Hanif Atma.
Well, I really understand what the play is here, but let's look at the situation that could help us understand his actions. The international community has literally withdrawn their physical support. And sooner or later, everything else will follow. That's financial, diplomatic support, etc. So I think the fact that his term is ending sooner, probably sooner than before, is a major cause to the stress. There needs to be a responsible entity for it. And any administration will very rarely take responsibility for what is happening, the catastrophe that's happening within its country at that moment. We are very well aware of all of the regional countries' involvement in the Taliban, and I think that using Pakistan as one of the countries to blame all of the catastrophes that's taking place is an easy political event to take place, because the people are easily swayed due to the literacy rate that we have in Afghanistan, the lack of information, the lack of responsibility, the lack of integrity. It is all missing. And what else could an Afghan administration do for its Afghan people? Because when the Afghan people all confide in the current insurgent group, then the administration is no use. And I think this is the play that's taking place.
Okay, Maria, here's the thing, and this is without prejudice to what you're saying, but what domestic audience is he addressing, considering that at all levels, this is an existential crisis for him and his administration? He badly needs support, and if he chooses to essentially rail against the very state actors that in some way or the other can support him, what is he going to gain out of that? Or is this some kind of, his last stand kind of a position?
I believe that this is the last stand position. We need a bad guy, and the political administration is using Pakistan as the bad guy. It's not as simple. It's very simple for the Afghan people, but it's not as simple when you're talking to educated individuals. There are many components to it. There are many individuals that are responsible for what is happening and taking place in Afghanistan. And United States is of those responsible entities. However, the average Afghan person lacks literacy rates. So to blame Pakistan is much more easier than to take responsibility for yourself. I think how the administration has handled this whole thing, and from the beginning of the administration, Pakistan has been under fire. Ghani has always addressed Pakistan as the key responsible state for what has been taking place in Afghanistan. And I think that is irresponsible and unprofessional, especially in the sense that neighbors are very important for what happens in Afghanistan. Not only Pakistan, Iran, China, they've all been involved with the Taliban, but it's how we address it, how we take our relationships forward to push diplomatically on persuading the Taliban to get to a certain level that we wish to. And one thing I would like to go on a record in saying that the Taliban are not controlled by any entity. They have no loyalty to anyone. And that is what the misconception is, that the populace believe that the Taliban can be controlled by any nation.
Right. Stay with me, Mariam. Let me put Dr. Rifat Hussain on this. Dr. Hussain, give me your view of, you heard what Mariam has said. It seems to me that, even as the existential crisis deepens for President Ghani, he seems to be, instead of addressing it, he seems to be going into this rhetorical mode and, as Mariam and I just discussed, scapegoating Pakistan, which is why Prime Minister Imran Khan actually set aside his text and said, look, let me explain to you why what you're saying is patently wrong.
Two things are very important. One is that, as noted by Mariam, is that this is not the first time Ghani has chosen an international platform to excoriate Pakistan for its involvement inside Afghanistan. He has done it before, and you would recall that one of the trips that he made about 2 years ago to GHQ when he came with a peace message, Pakistan assured him of all the support. And then twice, Pakistani leaders have visited Kabul to send a message of reassurance that Pakistan has no favorites when it comes to the Afghan conflict issue. And the second point that I would like to make is that Ghani thinks, apart from scapegoating Pakistan, Ghani thinks that he can win modicum of international support for himself, for his people who support him, including the officials. Ghani thinks that that international support that he's looking for will be forthcoming. And the third factor is the American promise to him that if he continues to stay in power, there will be developmental assistance that will be flowing, and so on and so forth. So Joe Biden administration, in a way, is directly responsible for shoring up the Ghani regime, and part of that shoring up shows in his anti-Pakistan rhetoric. It's not only a scapegoating, but the larger question is that would that strategy work itself out? I don't think that this strategy is going to work itself out. I'm not saying as a Pakistani, but I'm saying it as an analyst, is because Pakistan has the biggest stake in peace in Afghanistan, and Pakistan does not want that situation should get deteriorated. And Pakistan has been responsible for bringing the Taliban to the negotiating table. And maybe if Ghani has to address his complaint, he should address his complaint to the Americans, not to the Pakistanis.
Right. Very important point. Zahid Hussain, the government of Pakistan has been constantly talking about how complex the situation is. As a matter of fact, the former U.S. Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, in an interview when she was asked about Joe Biden's decision to withdraw the troops, called it a wicked problem. So all round, there is a very clear understanding and appreciation of the fact that this is not a situation which has any easy solutions or, which can be, tackled with a magic wand. Now, President Ghani, as we are discussing, seems to either not understand this, or as Mariam also said, and I tend to agree with her, that he seems to be taking a last stand, and in that he's also, as his speech at Khost showed, he was actually invoking the Pashtun identity also, and he was referring to the international border as Durand Line, essentially a pinprick. Earlier, Amrullah Saleh has been talking about this, Moeb has talked about this. So given all this, and this is something which, as you know very well, and you mentioned in your book also, is in so many ways at the core of the problems that Pakistan and Afghanistan had. So give me your sense of how you view President Ghani's remarks and whatever the play here is.
The situation in Afghanistan is as complex as ever. Afghanistan has been in some kind of conflict for the last 2-4 decades, and what we are seeing is completely unraveling of the situation after the withdrawal of American forces there. And what we are witnessing today is that from 2001 to 20 years later, we have come to a full circuit. Afghanistan is back, the Taliban are back there as a major force, and I think probably what is happening in Afghanistan was not quite unexpected. Now, as far as President Ghani's comments or remarks in Tashkent, I was not surprised at all. It's not the first time that President Ghani has made this remark. I'm not talking just about just recently. If you remember, at this Heart of Asia conference, sometime a few years ago in 2013 or 14, Sartaj Aziz was the advisor on foreign affairs, and Ghani virtually humiliated him in his speech. So in a way, actually, the trait of President Ghani is not new. We all know about his blast and outburst, particularly at international forum. It was unbecoming of president. And at this point of time, on the one side, he's seeking Pakistani support to bring Taliban on the negotiating table and actually and persuading Taliban to reduce violence. On the other hand,
which is what Pakistan is doing. Including this recent, meet in Doha. Pakistan, it had Pakistan's weight behind it.
Well, actually, yes, that's what I'm saying. That's also in Pakistan's interest that some kind of political settlement takes place in Afghanistan, because if situation continue to deteriorate, it will going to affect Pakistan much more than any other country. So I think to say, and almost like what President Ghani is saying, is trying to blackmail Pakistan, and is trying to say that, look, actually, you are responsible for everything, and now you do and fix the thing for himself. And what he has forgotten, and what is Amirullah Saleh's latest statement about the Pakistani Air Force helping Taliban to maintain their role in Spin Buldak, which is across the border from Pakistan. But he's forgotten, actually, if he's blaming Pakistan for Taliban advance in Spin Buldak, what are the reason? Why didn't he say anything when Taliban have occupied almost all the crossings and trade routes from almost all the neighboring countries? He had never said the same thing. What happened, actually, when the Taliban took over the control of that trade route from Iran, and for example,
yeah, the Islam Killa, Turgundi, Sher Khan Bandar, you name it. I mean, they've been at it for a long time. But I agree with you that Amrullah Saleh never spoke about that. But Zahid Hussain, I also want to ask you that there's within Afghanistan, if we look at the political actors, there is the Ashraf Ghani administration, there is the insurgent movement, which is the Taliban, but then there is also Ashraf Ghani's political opposition. And there are a number of people within that political opposition, and this is something that I would like to take back to Maryam Wardak also. There are a number of those political opposition leaders that are not particularly enamored of Ashraf Ghani and have actually called for him to step down.
I think probably you are right actually there, and all kind of political leaders are demanding that Ghani should step down and allow an interim government to form. As somebody told me that there are at least 12 candidates for the presidency and to succeed Ghani. So there's what is forgotten that is basically the fractious government itself, and there's no actually unanimity of thinking in Kabul and other places among the anti-Taliban forces. So that is the situation, and I think probably instead of blaming Pakistan, and instead of making some other country a scapegoat, Mr. Ghani should see himself actually what's really going to happen. And the collapse of the administration in various places in Afghanistan. In fact, actually, I believe that Taliban may not be that strong, but it's largely actually because of the collapse of Afghan government in various areas that has allowed Taliban to take control of those regions.
Right. Maryam Wardak, the same question. But let me also add that Pakistan was convening a conference of the political opposition and other stakeholders in Islamabad, which has been postponed to after Eid al-Adha. And Kabul's sense was that, Pakistan is trying to isolate Ghani. I mean, this is the political opposition that he has at home. So give me your sense of what the situation there is. I mean, leaving aside the Taliban for a while, just looking at what the political situation in Afghanistan under the post-US invasion constitution.
It's quite blatant that President Ghani lacks political unification. The last time all political leaders had come together was during the Karzai administration, something that a charismatic leader holds. But this is why I think Ghani's blunt and aggressive manner to certain nations has been able to balance his image. If he is lacking bringing political leaders under one roof to have a common vision, he then is able to increase his aggressive behavior in the diplomatic circle. His political behavior towards diplomats has not only been towards Pakistan, but has also been towards the United States with Zalmay Khalilzad. There have been aggressive communication with him through his national security advisor. We should be cognizant of the fact that this is where we need to look at the best interest of the Afghan people. Having cordial ties with our regional countries is extremely important, especially Pakistan, because of the number of refugees, Afghan refugees that are there. Past behaviors should be accounted for, but what the future holds is very much dictated by how we communicate with our partners and our allies. I think the United States is should be held responsible for what is happening in Afghanistan right now. The lack of their political commitment, the lack of credibility they hold in the Afghan citizens' eyes, the fact that they have left Afghan National Defense Security Forces in this state is very detrimental. Why do I say in this state? One of the things that most of the community is not aware of is most of the support by the security forces was air support. But Afghan fighters are very much land fighters. So the fact that the forces have left, they've taken all their Air Force support with them, left very few behind. But what could Afghan fighters do with that, especially when most of the fighting happens on the ground? There's just so many components that are involved in this. And again, calling out someone publicly and holding them accountable or holding a nation accountable in that sense is irresponsible. And it really sways the public the wrong way. And having an aggressive hate towards a regional country at the moment where there is so much instability in Afghanistan is going to be very dangerous for what's going to happen next.
Right. There's another thing also before I go to Dr. Hussain. The Afghan Analyst Network, which keeps putting out these reports, recent long report by Kate Clark and one other person, an Afghan journalist, I forget his name, talked about multiple appointments made by President Ghani of people who had no experience or almost no experience for the jobs that were entrusted to them.
Very disappointing that many appointments were not based on merit, and that was what brought such a shock to institutions. And I think he quickly recovered from that, maybe a year or two later, noticing the kind of negativity that was formed and the lack of progress that was taking place, and most importantly, the insecurity, especially within the ANDSF. We had deputy ministers who lacked military education, military experience, and also many of them were placed in policy roles, and they lacked that as well. And they brought a disturbance within the institutions. And this is where we struggle. We have to also pay attention to the cultural aspect of this. You can't bring a young individual to inform or direct an older population, especially a population that has served in the Soviet invasion and also now serving the duty to their country. Cultural context plays a huge role on the future operations of Afghanistan. And I think that is what President Ghani lacked and didn't understand, where President Karzai was very well calculated when it came to tribal mechanisms and incorporating that in his democratic play.
Yeah, that's certainly correct as far as former President Karzai is concerned. Dr. Hussain, you heard Mariam say with reference to President Ghani's approach through his national security advisor Hamdullah Mohib towards the United States. Mariam has also talked about the U.S. responsibility or lack thereof in terms of the kind of precipitous withdrawal decision that was taken by the United States. But there was, if you recall, a recent meeting between President Ghani and President Biden in which, going by the readout, President Biden, while saying that he is still invested in helping Afghanistan, what he offered was something which is not only vague, but also presupposed a certain degree of stability in order for that investment and, economic help to actually make any difference.
Ijaz, before I comment on that, I would like to make two additional points with regard to the issue of Ghani's survival strategy in these turbulent times. One is a very significant interview that Ghani himself gave to Dasu Spiegel. I'm not sure whether you have seen it. Since you read out of stuff, I'm sure, in which he exposed himself by underscoring his own vulnerability, and the headline of the interview was, Ghani said that I am one bullet away from being killed. And that exposes the sense of vulnerability that Ghani himself feels. Number one. Number two is that, he's in a denial mode. He does not want to see the unraveling of the ancien regime, which has been in place, and particularly under his watch for the last 4 or 5 years. And, it must be very painful to him to see all the quote unquote good work that he thinks that he has done for the Afghan people. And Ghani does not have any constituency until very recently, before he appointed Abdullah to the High Council. He was at loggerheads with Abdullah. So who himself happens to be a very formidable figure. So if you are Ghani and you are presiding over all these contradictions, then I think there's very little room for you to be seeing the reality as it is. And if you are in a denial mode, the best thing that you can do is to continue being in denial mode, because otherwise you will have to rethink your whole strategy, and the time is not on his side, as you and Mariam are both saying that this is his last chance. And then of course is the advice that he's getting from his advisors, be Amrullah Saleh and Muhibillah, and these are people who would like to feed him these myths. And there's absolutely no truth as compared to the Afghans' previous rise to power in 1996. There's nobody would buy this, that Pakistan is behind all of this. If that were true, then we live in an age of transparency for everybody. There will be and everybody agrees with Pakistani assertions that Pakistan is the most would be the most affected country by the negative turnout developments. That's one thing.
Right.
Now, lastly, the question that you have asked me about, Biden's strategy. Biden also knows that, Ghani, he's a transitional figure, if not totally transient figure, and, one day he has to step down. So the moment something happens to him, God forbid, or something by way of his survival strategy not working, then, Ghani is gone. And he has no constituency, as I said, inside Afghanistan, and that's his main problem.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Hussain, speaking with us. Zaid Hussain, before I wrap up, what's the prognosis? I mean, I know I'm asking you a very difficult question, given the complexity of the situation here, but as you know, Pakistan is still trying to make efforts to somehow get a deal stitched. What are the chances of that succeeding?
I think probably Ijaz is going to be a very difficult situation. Well, Pakistan may have some clout over Taliban at certain stage, but it is not correct to say that they can dictate terms to Taliban. Pakistan can actually persuade them, nudge them to come to negotiating table. But I don't think ultimately it will be decision of the Taliban. They feel actually they are victorious, and I think probably that has also given them some kind of confidence. And they may be waiting for some time more to strengthen their position. And if they ever come to negotiating table, they want it to be from their position of strength. And I think probably it's getting more and more complex situation in Afghanistan, because it's not just about Kabul government fighting the Taliban insurgent, but it's also the third element which has come into the picture, and that makes the situation much more complex and much more volatile, is that militias, the rise of militias, local militias, some of them, warlords, they always have some kind of force of their own. But now they have
But some of the militias, he actually wants some of the militias, and he's actually actively supporting them. But thank you so much. That was Zaid Hussain speaking with us. Mariam Wardak, finally, give me your sense of what you see is likely. I mean, I'm asking this question because there is an entire generation of young men and women who have been plugged into not only the digital world, but have tasted modernity and its opportunities, if you will. How are you looking at their future?
I think that there is going to be struggles like any potential nation, and the fact that they have so much access to information, communication, connectivity, that is what is going to be able to help them in coming together. Their willpower to bring peace to Afghanistan is very hopeful. And the fact that they don't allow this kind of political instability, security concerns come in the way for a hopeful Afghanistan. I think that the Afghan youth is not the same as what anyone had envisioned about 20 years ago. And the Afghan Taliban are I think are very concerned about the force that they're going to have to reckon with, because it's not a blank slate. They are not going to be able to push them around. There is going to be struggle. And the beautiful part about this struggle is that the Afghan youth are very aware of their religion, their rights, and they've also had a taste of what a modern life, able to have economic independency, access to job opportunities, and have also, many of them have been educated abroad. This is the beauty of what the youth is. And I think although that the current instability and challenges that we face, the Afghan youth will persevere and bring a better Afghanistan for tomorrow.
Right, and especially the women, remarkable young women professionals, and one hopes that the future of Afghanistan will be determined by them. They'll be a part of that future. Thank you so much, Mariam Wadik. Special thanks to you, considering you were up at a very early hour to be on the program. Thank you for that also. We shall take a short break and return to discuss Chinese Premier Li Keqiang's call to Prime Minister Imran Khan following the Dasu terror attack. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Last Friday, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang spoke with Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, urging Khan to hold accountable the culprits in what he described as a terrorist attack on a bus ferrying Chinese workers in Dasu in northern Pakistan. The Chinese company is working on a hydro project in the area. According to a statement published on a Chinese government website, and I quote from that, Li Keqiang hopes that Pakistan will take practical and effective measures to strengthen the security and protection of Chinese personnel and institutions in Pakistan and make every effort to prevent similar incidents from happening again, unquote. This is not the first time Chinese nationals have been attacked in Pakistan. China knows that there are a number of state actors that want to disrupt China's Belt and Road Initiative, of which China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is the flagship. It also knows that Pakistan has always provided security for its nationals working here. So what's different this time? To discuss this, joined by Ambassador Zamir Akram, a former diplomat with long experience of bilateral and multilateral diplomacy, and Musharraf Zaidi, founder and senior fellow at Tabadab, an Islamabad-based think tank. So, Ambassador Akram, what is different? I mean, I have a list of, there have been at least 6 or 7, starting with May 2003, in which, unfortunate incident, 3 Chinese workers were killed. There have been 6 or 7 such attempts. And as I said in my opening, China knows that there are a number of state actors that aren't particularly enamored of China's BRI and CPEC.
Well, to say not enamored is an understatement, Ijaz. I think they are actively working to disrupt the China-Pakistan relationship, in particular the CPEC project. These attacks that you have mentioned, targeting the Chinese attacks on their consulate in Karachi, on their workers in Gwadar, and now this latest attack in Dasu on a hydroelectric power project. I mean, if you were doing a criminal investigation, you would always look at who is the beneficiary of such actions, and it's very clearly, at least to my mind, that the beneficiary is India. So I have no doubt that the Indian intelligence is behind this. Maybe they are also working with the Chinese, with the Chinese concern about the ETIM, these Turkestan terrorists. We also know that the BLA is working with RAW out of their strongholds, their sanctuaries in Afghanistan. So there can be any number of people who actually carried out this attack. But the mastermind behind it, in my mind, is clearly India, and their purpose is to derail the Pakistan-China economic relationship, the strategic partnership between Pakistan and China. So I think, yeah, go ahead.
Right. So I, without prejudice to what you're saying, clearly, as you and that's a great example. Criminal investigation. I mean, motive, is extremely important. But as you know, I mean, you've been dealing with the Chinese. They don't go public with these things. So what is different this time?
And I think they're also using this as a message. They are trying to send a message, particularly to India and others, perhaps even the United States, which have opposed CPEC, that the Chinese take this very seriously, and that if such things continue to happen in the future, which undermine Chinese interests, then they reserve the right to intervene directly, and not necessarily through Pakistan, but through other means at their disposal. So I think this is a message also to those who want to disrupt and derail this Pakistan-China partnership.
Now, that's a very interesting point. Let me take a point to Musharraf Zaidi. So, Musharraf, let's start in reverse, starting with the point that Ambassador Akram is making and then going back to my original question to him.
The fact is that China's frustration with Pakistan is much deeper and wider than simply whether or not Chinese engineers feel safe and are afforded the full security that their government and the Pakistani government both have assured them of. Going all the way back to the very beginning of this administration, when Abdul Razak Dawood gave an interview to the Financial Times and caused a significant breach in the relationship that had to be repaired directly through the personal intervention of the Chief of Army Staff, onwards through many, many instances of uncareful, thoughtless, impractical, and reckless statements by senior representatives and officials of the government of Pakistan. But the issues that plague the Pakistan-China relationship are not simply restricted to either security or reckless statements. There's another more profound element to the frustration that the Chinese have. Again, I think, quoting Zamir Akram, rightly, that the Chinese have, and that is the pace and machinations of the CPEC itself. Whether it's the decision to either establish or not establish the CPEC authority, whether it is the decision to staff the CPEC authority in the manner that it has been staffed, and whether or not that has been ideal for the pursuit of CPEC over and above any other consideration. I think there's a lot that is going on beyond security and beyond reckless statements that needs to be unpacked to understand why on this occasion China has chosen to, for lack of better terminology, Hillary Clinton Pakistan on this occasion.
Right. Okay, Musharraf, I wish this were a bigger segment, but what you have put on the table requires a longer discussion. So, Ambassador Akram, you heard what Musharraf Zaidi said. You want to add something to this?
Fundamentally, I agree with Musharraf that there has been a growing sense of anxiety, I should say, on the part of the Chinese at the pace and the direction at which our relationship has gone, particularly in implementation of CPEC and other projects. But I think a lot of the ground that has been covered so far, and we have sort of made up for some of those misunderstandings that have taken place in the past. But right now, I think because your focus is on this particular incident, so I think that is really the heart of the problem, and that is that the Chinese expect, and rightly expect, that their workers should be provided the necessary level of security in Pakistan. That is the essence
but
of
let me interject here, Prakram. You know that there is a dedicated force of 15,000 people, and according to some reports, the numbers have gone up with reference to physical protection and safety and security of installations also, and Chinese personnel also with reference to CPEC. This particular project was not part of CPEC, although there was local security there. And as I said in my opening, I think the Chinese do understand that this is, in some ways, given what we talked about, how so many state actors want to sabotage this entire thing, that there is a cost of business here also.
No, there is a cost of business, and I think that we should also, I would say, make the most of this, because this is a challenge, but it is also an opportunity. And the opportunity is that we need to enhance our security partnership, and particularly our counter-terrorism partnership, through enhanced intelligence sharing and intelligence cooperation with the Chinese across the board. And that is an opportunity that we need to use now, including to project what I think is, as I mentioned, an Indian involvement. And I think with the Chinese, we should project this more proactively across the world, and the Chinese should be a part of this effort.
Right. Thank you so much. That was Mr. Zamir Akram speaking with us. Musharraf Zaidi, so it seems to me that there are two issues here. One is, of course, the various issues that you talked about with reference to CPEC. There's the other issue of state actors that want to sabotage this, not just this project, but also the broader BRI thing. So give me your sense of how Pakistan, and this is going to happen. I have no doubt that this is not the end of it. So what is Pakistan supposed to do to address these two issues, separate, but also they have a nexus?
They absolutely do, Ijaz, and I think that you've consistently been one of those that has written about strategic issues as they relate to internal policy. So I think yours is exactly the right platform on which this discussion should be taking place. What is one supposed to do? I can only offer the hard answer, because the easy answers are available as, sort of easy sugar rushes in the mass discourse as it is. The hard answer is that Pakistan's state capabilities, whether it refers to police reform, an issue that you yourself have written on extensively, whether it refers to the procurement of vaccines, and as it refers to Pakistan's relationship with China, requires multifarious state capability that is not existent, cannot be expected to deliver. Pakistan needs to find a manner in which it can balance its needs strategically beyond China, including the United States, with its core strategic need for China and its relationship within that realm. In order to do that, the reason that I specifically mentioned CPEC and the CPEC authority and the management of public statements is because all of those things are part and parcel of the wider spectrum of state capability. The idea that we can assign one individual, an ambassador in some country, or a senior official, either within the military or outside it, that can fix everything. For example, let's take the example of Ambassador Sadiq, who is the special envoy to Afghanistan. Ambassador Sadiq is literally the best human being possible for that job, but his ability to deliver hinges on a wider net of state capability. If Ambassador Sadiq has to compete with people who are not lined up with the overarching strategic objectives of the state at the level of BPS 19 or a colonel or an MNA or MPA that's making statements willy-nilly, then all the work that Ambassador Sadiq does and is capable of doing will be undermined. The exact same thing applies to how Pakistan manages its relationship with China and the wider spectrum of challenges that confront Pakistan as it moves into really a very brave new world, full of opportunity, as we saw in Uzbekistan over the weekend, but full of the perils that came with that almost as a cost of Uzbekistan over the past week.
Brilliantly put. Couldn't take more with you. Thank you so much. Special thanks, Musharraf, since you were a long-haul flight and yet you're kind enough to be on the program. This is all from In Focus this evening. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.